Okay, so memorizing the fretboard. This is not a superior method or anything like this. This is just one way of doing it. There's many other methods, but this is the way how I had did it. Again, this is not superior or anything like that. This is just a method I had used. Uh, so, thing to understand, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to sound disrespectful or anything like that. But you do need to understand how the musical alphabet works. And so, in Western music, we have 12 tones, but you'll see here I got listed only 7, right? So that's what we're going to do here is just learn the natural notes, these white keys, and I'll talk about that here in a second. So basically, your alphabet's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And then after G, after that 7th note, it just repeats A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So you got to pretend like this is just an infinite amount of these letters just going forward and backward. So basically, it's just going higher in pitch. If I were to start, on D and go in alphabetical order, starting on D, your next note going forward in pitch would be E, F, G, A, B, C, and just keeps going on, right? If I were on D going backwards in pitch, it'd be C, B, A, and then G, right? And just keeps going backwards. G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, keeps going. So you got to pretend like it goes this way as well. So that's just a simple way of looking at your alphabet here. If you were to look on this low E string, we're starting on E, right? And so we're starting alphabetically going forward. So you got E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and then it repeats at E. So I don't know if you can make this out, but I have a little fret markers on here. So this is a 3rd fret. That's the 5th fret, the 7th fret, the 9th fret, and then here's a 12th fret. So basically this E right here is your octave, right? So there's your low E string that you have, your open E. And going all the way this way on your 12th fret, that's your octave of E. It's almost like if this, it is basically the open strings played at the 12th fret, because that's the octave, right? And so basically your 13th fret right here, even though I don't have it written out, it would be F, G, A, B, C, D, E. It would keep going. So if this was a 24th fret guitar diagram that I got, let's pretend this is our 12th fret right here. So this is our 13th fret, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and it just keeps going on and on, right? All the way to the 24th fret. And so the distance between these notes are still the same here. So this is your 13th fret, right? You have an F on your 13th fret, you have a G on your 15th fret, and then you have an A on the 17th fret, and it just keeps going on and on, right? So anyway, how to memorize the fretboard. And again, this is not a superior method or anything like that. It's just a method I had used and I was teaching for a while. And this is the method I was showing. What are these dots over here? What's these triangles? This is an octave system here. So basically, whatever note you're playing here on this low E string, the octave will be on this D string up here, right? You're skipping a fret right here. So you're going up to this D string. And then basically, whatever you play on your low E is the same thing on your high E, right? Because, they're the same string, it's just one's an octave higher, or lower, depending on how you're viewing it. But basically, the notes on the low E string are the exact same notes on the high E string, right? So whatever you do on your low E, it's going to be the same thing on a high E. So what I did here with this fretboard here, I didn't put any fret markers or anything. The reason why is because this is like a movable shape. So this is like an infinite fretboard right here. We can move this shape anywhere. So basically, I know it's a tedious thing to do. I was one of those. I was one of those guys when I first started playing. When I wanted to get more into theory, I started noticing that I had to know not only the intervals, but what were the notes on the fretboard. And I found it very tedious. But this was one method that I was able to do to help me learn all the notes on a fretboard. And again, this is, I don't know how many times I've said it now, but this is not a superior method or anything like that. This is just one method of doing it. This is how I do it. And so this octave system here, I know some people might frown upon this and say this is, a very lazy way of knowing all the notes on there, which is, I guess, somewhat true. But the thing is, with what I'm getting at is that these are your training wheels, right? It's like a reference guide. After doing this for so long, you'll start to notice that you start relying on this less and less, and you don't use it anymore. You just you start to know them by heart. An example would be when we first started playing guitar, we were tuning to standard tuning, right? And so for the first time we ever tuned, we had a tuner or some sort of diagram that would let us know that your sixth string is an E note, your fifth string is an A, your fourth string is a D, your third string is a G, and your second string is a B, and your first string is an E, right? And so every time you would tune your guitar or put on some new strings, you would always look at that diagram of what order those strings should be tuned to, right? Well, after a while of playing, you start to just know this by heart because you've done it so much, right? So now when you put on, new strings, you don't need to look at a diagram or a chart or anything like to let you know, what strings they should be in order for standard tuning, right? You just know it by heart. You know that your lowest string here is a low E, is an A, a D, a G, and a B, and an E. So even if you were, say, if you had like a Floyd Rose system or some sort of trem system, you could tune out of order, right? You don't have to do it in order. So, for example, like if you have a Floyd Rose, and this is somewhat off topic, but if you have a Floyd Rose, you're probably going to tune in a different sequence instead of just in order. Whether going lower to higher or higher to lower. So, like if you had a Floyd Rose, you'd probably tune your high E, your G string, and then your A string, right? And then you would tune your low E to your D and your B string right there, because that would keep an even amount of tension on the tremolo, right? Because basically, if you tune everything going in one direction, you're having more tension pulling up gradually in a, I guess, like an ascending pattern. So basically, when your tremolo should be parallel, if you tune them all going in one straight direction, and depending on your springs in the back too, what's going to happen is that your tremolo is not going to be parallel. It's now going to be slightly tilted up, right? Because the strings are pulling this way, and the springs in the back have less tension. So all the strings on the guitar are pulling the trem going this way. So if you tune it out of sequence, where you tune 3 notes at a time, or 3 strings at a time in that gap, from E to G to A, and then E to D to B, you're gradually pulling on it with enough tension, or it's an even amount of tension. And then if it is slightly pulled up, you just go and adjust the springs in the back, which would pull it, going this way, and it would make it parallel. So I didn't mean to rant about that, but that's just an example. But the idea is here that these strings by heart. You don't even need to look at a package or anything like that to know what these notes are. You just know it by heart. Well, it's the same idea with using these octave systems. Once you use it for so long, or just using it daily, and this is not going to happen overnight. Once you've been using this for so long, you start to use this less and less. You'll realize that the more you use it, the more you're going to start to recognize where these notes are at and everything. So anyway, enough ranting. Let me talk about how I had memorized them, and this is basically how I did it. So we know what these strings are. We know what these notes are because, well, we know the open strings by heart, right? In E standard or standard tuning. So in other words, on our first fret here on the low E string, we have an F, and on the third fret we have a G, and we have an A on the fifth fret, right? So these are the first 3 to memorize, and you want to do it by no more than 3 notes at a time. So basically what we're going to do is memorize where this F is at, which is on the first fret on the low E string, and then where this G is at, which is on the third fret, and then where this where this A note is on the fifth fret, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use this octave system right here. So this will allow you to know these 3 notes on 3 strings. So you could probably already see the pattern here. So whatever note you have on this low E string will be the same note, or will actually be an octave here on this D string, in the same distance right here. And then of course whatever you play on the low E string is going to be the same thing on the high E. So in other words, here's our F, right? It's on the first fret. So the octave of F is here on the D string on the third fret, right? And then the other octave of F is here on the high E string on the first fret. So it's that triangle that's going on. It's the same pattern right here. So now moving to the G note, you have G right here on this low E string that's on the 3rd fret. And then you have a you have a G note here on the 5th fret on the D string, right? And here's your other octave of D up here. It's that same triangle. And then here's your A note, right, on the 5th fret. Then you have another A note. The octave of A is on the D string, that's on the 7th fret. And then from there you have the other octave, which is on the 5th fret. It's the same triangle that's going on. Now the idea is that when you pick up your guitar, maybe I should zoom in on this. When you pick up your guitar or doing a diagram like this, the idea is not speed. You don't want to sit down and pick up your guitar and go F, 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 you know, over and over like that. No, the idea is that you're just trying to get you're just trying to memorize where this F is at, where this F is at, and where this F is at in relation, right? So the idea here is that once you learn all your notes, it's like no matter where you're at, if you know that, you know, you're on here on your G, right? Well, there's another G over here, and there's also a G here. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the idea is that you're going to learn the positions of where these 3 Fs are at in relation from the E, the D, and the high E string, right? So you know them in that position by knowing this triangle pattern here. So once you've practiced these 3 notes in 3 different positions, right? Then you can move on to the next 3. So the next 3 would be B, C, and D, right? So same process. Here's a B right here on the 7th fret. Here's a B on the 9th fret on the D string, and then here's a B on the 7th fret up here. So again, it's that same triangle that's going on here. So now we look at C. Here's the octave of C, and the other octave of C, right? So it's that same triangle, right? And then finally here we are on D. So here's D, octave of D, and the other octave of D. It's that same triangle that's going on, right? And so like the E string, I'm sorry, this E note here on the 12th fret, even though I don't have it past the 12th fret, you can kind of already see just by the shape alone of where that octave of E would be at on the D string. So if this is our 12th fret, right, and this is our D string over here, our E would be on the 14th fret of the D string right here, right? And then you have E right here on the 12th fret. So you can already see that pattern, even though I don't have any markings here. Just to make sure we got this, if I got that clearly, let's pretend this is a 12th fret, right? So this is a 12th fret, here's a 13th fret, here's a 14th fret, right? So here's our 12th fret, there's E, there's the octave of E on the 14th fret on the D string, and the other octave of D on the 12th fret. So it's that same pattern. And just like what I said earlier, this is basically your open strings on the 12th fret. You can it'll just, this whole thing repeats. So if you have 24 frets, you'll go all the way. If you got 22 frets, you know, you'll get up to what would that be? I think it's a C sharp or D, one of the two. Well, okay, this is 24, 23. Yeah, it'd be a D note right here. Is that you would have 22 frets. But anyway, that's the idea here. So once you learn all your natural notes on the low E string in this method of using octaves, now we'll move on to the A string. And you're only really going to learn just the notes all on the low E and on the A. And because of that, you'll unlock pretty much all the other natural notes all over the other strings by using this octave system. So on the on the A string, we have a B on the 2nd fret, a C on the 3rd fret, and a D on the 5th fret, right? So basically, this is the same idea that we used here with this low E string, but this one is now starting on the A string. So whatever note this is on your A string, you'll have the octave here on your G string, and technically this will be a unison from this note here. It'll be on the B string, right? So whatever note's on the A, it'll be here on the G and on the B in the same pattern right here. So basically you're skipping a fret in between here, just like this one was. There's an empty fret in between going to the next string up, right? And this one's just going a fret back, basically. You're skipping a fret in the middle, right? You see how there's an empty one there? So this distance to this distance here on the B string, you'll have an octave of it. So what a unison is basically when a note is the exact same pitch. So if you were to play whatever note this is on a G string and then at the same distance over here on the B string, let's pretend this is an A note, right? So this octave of A right here, this A note is going to be the same pitch as this note right here. So that's a unison. It's not higher or lower. It's the same pitch. Technically, if you want to get real technical about it, this note right here is probably going to sound a bit more warmer than this one because simply our G string is a bit thicker than our B string, right? But you'll hear that they're the exact same pitch. It's not an octave higher or lower. They're the exact same note. It's the same pitch. While this note right here it would be an octave lower. You would be going down, right? Or if you're starting here, it'd be going an octave up. But essentially, these two notes right here are unisons. The note on a B and a G string are a unison. But the idea here is that we're trying to find three positions that we could find three notes. This one just happens to be two octaves. This one's just one octave. But anyway, enough with the super technical talk with that stuff. Just a good thing to know. So just like what we did with the low E string, we're going to do with the A string. So whatever note you have here, so we have a B, right? So here's the octave of B, and then here's the other octave of B, or a unison, however you want to look at that. I'm just going to say the other octave because you can either go from this B to this B, or this B to this B, whichever way, you know. So here's your B note, there's your octave of B note, there's your other octave of B note. So your B open string, right? So it's that same pattern that's going on over here, right? So now if we look at C, here's the octave of C, and then here's the other octave of C, right? It's that same triangle, same pattern, right? And then we have D. So here's D, here's the octave of D, and then there's the other octave of D. It's that same triangle, no matter where you go. It's going to be the same pattern that's starting here on this A string. So now we'll move on to the next three. So you have E on the 7th fret, F on the 8th fret, and then G on the 10th fret, right? So here's E, octave of E, the other octave of E, right? Same thing. My battery's about to die on this thing. So here's F, the other octave of F, and then the other octave of F, right? And then here's G, other octave of G, and the other octave of G, right? And just like what we did on the low E string, it's the same thing. If I had an A note right here, where would that other A note be on the G string? Be on the 14th fret, and then the other octave of A would be over here on the 10th fret, right? So once you basically unlock, or basically once you learn all the natural notes on both your low E and A string, and using this octave system, you now unlocked all the natural notes on your fretboard. So basically, if this is an F, right, we know an F is here on the 1st fret of the E, we know an F is here on the D string, and we also know an F is here on the high E. We also know that there's an F here on the A string, and thus there's an F here on the G string and an F on the B string. You now know where there's F all over these. You now know where there's Fs all over 6 strings, so you can cover all your ground. So if you're ever playing something, you know, say like an A minor scale or something like that. So you got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Well, you know, you could play it going this way, or you could play your A, B, C over here, D, E, F, and then G going this way. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or however you want to do it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It doesn't matter. But you know where those notes are at. So you just unlock the fretboard. Now sharps and flats. Let's talk about sharps and flats. Let me rip this page off. Hopefully my battery lasts, because it is saying it's low. Actually, let me go plug this in. Hopefully it doesn't flip out when I do so. Hoping my computer will charge it as I'm recording, because I wouldn't like to do this again. I wouldn't like to try and explain everything again. Is it charging? No, you're not charging. Come on. I'll probably just edit all this out. There we go. Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so sharps and flats. Let's talk about sharps and flats. So remember what I was talking about with white keys or white notes, and why I only showed 7 instead of all 12. So let's oh my god, focus. Let's talk about intervals real quick, or sharps and flats actually. Let's do that. So if I were to write out the musical alphabet again, so I got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I'll just have the octave, which is A over here. So we have 7 notes here, right, and an octave. So those are 7 notes, stopping here at the G. So where do we get the 12 at? Where do the 12 even come from? So between some of these between some of these notes, we have notes that exist. So for example, between A and B, there's a note in there that exists, and that's A sharp. And I'm going to talk about why I'm going by sharps for right now. I'll talk about where flats come into play. So A sharp, and B, right? So between A and B, there's a note that exists in between there, and that's A sharp. So now moving on to B, no note exists in between B and C, in Western music at least. And I know in other cultures and stuff like that, there's a note does exist in between there, but in Western music, no note exists in between B and C. If you play piano or even look at a guitar fretboard, you'll notice that it's just B and C is right next to each other. So there's no note in between. So C and D, there's a note in between that, and that is C sharp. D to E, there's a note that exists in between that, and that's D sharp. And so now E and F, no note exists in between that. It's the same like B and C, there's nothing that exists in between it. It's just E to F, that's it. It's right next to each other. So now F to G, a note exists in between that, and that's F sharp. And now G to A, a note exists in between there, and that is a G sharp, right? So now this is where we get the 12 tones from, or 12 notes. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? There we go. This might look a bit more familiar if I were to do something like this. You're probably already seeing what I'm doing here. And this is where I'm going to talk about sharps and flats. So today we got a really horrible looking piano. So basically, what I was talking about with natural notes or white notes are the white keys on a piano, right? These are all our natural notes. And so the sharps and flats, these are all our black keys that we have on a piano. So what is a sharp and flat? Like why did I call this an A sharp and not a B flat? So basically you could call them both. You can call this a B flat if you want, or you can call this black note also an A sharp. They're the same note. So this is what we would call an enharmonic. And so what enharmonic means is that it's just basically 2 different spellings for the same note. So in other words, this black key, if you were to play it, you could call it either an A sharp or a B flat. It's the same note. It's just 2 different ways to spell it. Now, there is somewhat of a correct way of spelling them or calling them by name, and it just really depends on the context. So in other words, just think of sharps as raising up by a half step, right? And flats are lowering by a half step. So basically, so from, I should have, no, yeah, I'm sorry. So basically, if you were playing this A note right here, right, and you were going to this black key right here, you would call that an A sharp because you're going up in pitch. Now, if you were playing a B note and you're going back, which you're going to this black key right here, you're going backwards in pitch, right? So it would be a B flat. Does that make sense? So that's how enharmonics work. So in other words, if I were to call this note right here a B sharp, this is also how enharmonics work. So if I call this a B sharp, that's implying that it's being raised up by a half step. So if B sharp now becomes C, right? But we're calling this note here B sharp and not C, because B sharp is the enharmonic equivalent of C, right? So it's the same note. You can call this B sharp if you want, and you're going to run into that in like some some music. It just depends on what music you're going after. You'll probably run into something that says like, you know, B sharp or C flat or something like that. So if this is B sharp right here, this is enharmonic equivalent, right? So C is our enharmonic equivalent of I'm sorry, B sharp is our enharmonic equivalent of C. So if I had D right here, right, and I was going to this black note right here, that would make it D flat. And so this is D flat. If I were to say D double flat, that's implying that this is flattened twice. So here's D flat, D double flat. So D double flat is enharmonic equivalent of C. Does that kind of make sense? Because you'll run into double flats and double sharps in some point of reading sheet music, but it's not a necessary thing to read sheet music to get into this side of music theory. But if you're like wanting to be say like a studio musician or a session player or something like that, it's very important that you understand how these sharps and flats, the enharmonics, work. Because you might get a piece of music that has, say, a C flat in there, and we know there's no black key in between B and C, so that C flat doesn't exist, but really it does, because it's implying that it's, well, a B note, right? So C flat is an enharmonic equivalent of B. The same way how D double flat is an enharmonic equivalent of C, and B sharp is an enharmonic equivalent of C. You see how it works? So just a recap. So if I were playing this C note right here, and I was going up to this black key, that would be a C sharp. But if I was playing this this D note right here, going to this black key, it'd be D flat. So does that kind of make sense? So sharps are just going upward in pitch, and flats are going backwards in pitch. Enharmonics just mean two different spellings for the same note. So either one is correct, but in context, depending on what you're doing, you want to use the correct, I guess, a spelling here. So basically, if you're playing C and the sheet music's telling you from that C you need to go to a D flat, I mean, you understand what they're saying, but it'd probably be written better for it to be C sharp or something. It just really depends on the context. And other times too, that might actually be incorrect. It might actually be more correct to have it say C to D flat if there's no D natural in there. So then you would understand that, oh, well, it's telling me to play behind D is what it is. But either way, that's basically how enharmonics work. So hopefully that helps out here. It's not confusing or anything like that. So now if we go back to our fretboard over here, now that we know what sharps and flats are at, now you understand what's in between these white notes, these white keys, right? These natural notes. So between F and G, you have a black key that's right here. And so that's going to be an F sharp, or you can call it a G flat. Between G and A, that right there is a G sharp or an A flat. So in other words, now practicing all your sharps on here, using this octave system, and your flats, you've basically unlocked all the notes on a fretboard. So in other words, if I'm playing a G sharp right here, right? So here's a G sharp, there's another G sharp, so octave G sharp. Here's the other octave of G sharp. So boom, it's that same pattern, right? Here's a G sharp here, here's a G sharp on the 13th fret on the G string, and then here's a G sharp here on the 9th fret on the B string, right? So there's all my G sharps. Here's my A flat. It's the same note, right? So here's A flat, A flat, A flat, right? Here's A flat, another A flat, right? So you've unlocked all the notes on the fretboard just by memorizing where all the natural notes are at, and now that you understand what sharps and flats are, you can easily fill in those gaps of what these other notes are in between, all these black keys that are going on here. So hopefully that helps out. Next one I'll talk about is more music theory than guitar theory of how to make scales and stuff like that. But for right now, practice this. Practice knowing your notes on the fretboard before you move on to anything else, because this is very important. I mean, yes, you can go forward, but you'll find that it'll be hard to apply to your guitar because you don't know where the notes are on the fretboard. Just knowing where they're at, makes everything a lot easier. So anyway, hopefully this helps out. This wasn't too much of a board. I apologize for my camera almost dying and having like a little gap of me looking for a charger. But anyway, hopefully this helps. If you have any questions, ask anybody away inside learning. Eventually somebody will answer. Just be patient. Or just message me if you got a question on what I'm talking about here. Though I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that are knowledgeable in learning. They'll understand what I'm talking about here. So anyway, hopefully that helped.